Tel da man ran ho. If you look up this phrase in the Encyclopedia Intergalactica, it will tell you that it translates to the time of remembrance and regret. But if you look it up in Old High Tashinka, the ancient language of the Rambonians, it means the day the skies turned green. Now, in order to tell you this story, the one that Bob has already told Jack Burton, I must now lift you up once again and over the great spiral galaxy known as the Milky Way, and we'll now zoom backwards into time. As you look over there, you'll notice Sol, and we're now at a point in history when one of man's most distant ancestors would pick up two rocks and discover that if he struck these two rocks together, pretty sparks would fly. But fire that would warm his food and keep their caves warm as well, and would drive away the predators of the night, was still nothing more than a distant dream. Now over there, towards the center of the galaxy, you'll notice a huge section that has now been lit up red. These are the worlds of the Rambonian Empire. It is now in its third golden age, at the very height of its power. Over 1,000 worlds are now under Rambonian rule. The Rambonians of this time were 7-foot-tall humanoids with bodies of great strength and were admired by all for their physical beauty. If you took the weakest old Rambonian librarian and put him in a one-on-one bodybuilding competition against Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, Schwarzenegger would finish 10th. Their culture was a monument to the very art of war, and their battle prowess was feared by all. And by the time of the 5th Elecanthila, worlds were literally surrendering at the sight of their war fleets without a shot even being fired. Some races even sent envoys to the Rambonians to surrender in advance. And the 5th Elecanthila, their ruler, was bored. His predecessors had literally conquered all known space and left him with no glorious battles of his own to fight. He looked out across the stars and wondered how he would make his own mark in history when none of the major galactic powers would even dare engage him. And that's when he noticed the large empty tract of space on his star map. He inquired with all his subjects, even other races, such as the Zeta Reticulans, the Pleiadians, and even the Centaurians, and they all told him it was a place where no others dared go. Perfect. He formed what would be called the First Great Fleet, comprised of over 127,000 of their best and mightiest warships, along with all his most trained and specialized troops, and ordered them to go forth and conquer that great empty place on the map. It would be glorious. And he could not have been more wrong. The fleet departed with all the pomp and ceremony that the Empire could give. They reached the Great Void, they entered, and were never seen again. A month went by, and not one transmission was received. The Elecanthila stood in his throne room and looked at the three-dimensional battle map of the region in total befuddlement. Word had already begun to spread across the Empire that the First Great Fleet has been lost. In the eyes of their subjects, the overlords had suffered their first major loss in eons. And you know the saying, when God bleeds. His thoughts were interrupted by a hand on his shoulder. The Elecanthila whirled around, and standing before him was the commander of the First Great Fleet. The Elecanthila was about to shout for his guards when the commander spoke. He said, "There will be no more nobles. You are the last. The sign comes with the dawn, and 36 Beldars hence you will pay. All will pay for eternity." The commander then pulled his ceremonial dagger and cut his own throat. He was dead before he hit the floor. The Elecanthila shook in rage and panic. For the first time in his life, fear struck his heart. And the following morning, the sign did come. It would be the final dawn of the Rambonian Empire as it was. When the sun rose, it was an emerald green. The sky was green. The whole world was green. On every world where a Rambonian stood, the sky turned green, and every one of them fell to their knees in torment. And on every world it stayed this way until the sun set. And seeing their chances, that's when the revolt began. The Empire had begun to fall apart. The First Great Fleet had been compromised of over 3/4 of their military forces. It had all their best trained warriors, and with a significant part of their military might gone, open revolt had begun amongst the conquered worlds. But that was not the worst of it. In the next 36 Beldars, or 20 Earth years, the empire that had conquered over 1,000 worlds and had stood for eons had been reduced to less than 200. And it was then that the fifth and last Elecanthila would learn what the commander had meant when he had said all would pay, and pay for eternity. Every child that had been born after the day the sky turned green led normal, healthy lives until their 20th birthdays, 36 Beldars, and that is when they would begin to mutate into hideously deformed creatures. Creatures that could not survive on their own, creatures with no strength, no prowess, and the Rimbonian race had no choice but to retreat into cybernetic shells. And it has been that way ever since. When the people began to realize that what was happening to their children was a direct result of the day the sky turned green, all eyes turned towards the central palace. In outrage, they marched against the ceremonial guards and began to batter against the Elecanthila's door. They wanted revenge. That's when the first of them looked up and noticed that the Elecanthila now stood on the battlements of the great palace. He was dressed in his lavender war robes and was adorned with a beautiful golden sash. He looked down upon them into their eyes, his own filled with tears. And the last words he said were, "I am sorry. I am so sorry." And that's when he leapt off the battlement. And that's when someone noticed that the other end of his golden sash was tied to the banister above. When they finally got into the great palace, they went immediately through every room and found that in the royal nursery all the children had been slain, and written in blood on the wall were the same 4 words that would be found burned into the bridge doors of the Ajax millennia later. You have been warned. The fall of the Rambonian Empire had much the same effect as the fall of the Roman Empire on Earth. It was the beginning of a galactic dark age. Worlds would go off, found their own kingdoms that would rise and fall in the goodness of time. And of course, the majority of them, though, did eventually band together and became known as the Border Worlds Alliance. That great big empty pocket of space, where no others would go, was named, in their old language of Tashinka, Nalava Horwa Mawen Elakagato, the place where the Masters of Revenge dwell. Over time, though, it became shortened, maybe to fit better on maps, but also to translate better for most races. It is now marked on most maps as the Horwa Imperium.